Right now, somewhere in the world, a mother is losing her child to cancer. A father is burying his son who died in an accident. A young person is battling depression, so deep they can barely get out of bed. And in that moment of agony, they're all asking the same question that has haunted humanity for thousands of years. If God is real, if He's all-powerful, if He truly loves us... why does He allow such unbearable pain? This isn't just a philosophical question. This is personal. Maybe you're asking it right now because of something you're going through. Maybe you've lost someone you love. Maybe you're facing a diagnosis that terrifies you. Maybe life has hit you so hard that you're wondering if God even exists at all. I'm about to share with you something that will completely transform how you see your pain. Something discovered by one of the most brilliant philosophical minds of our time. A man who struggled with this exact question and found an answer so profound, so revolutionary, that it changes everything. Peter Kreeft wasn't always a believer. In fact, he started exactly where you might be right now, as a skeptic. Growing up, he looked at the world and saw the same thing you see. Innocent children suffering, good people dying young, evil, seeming to triumph while the righteous struggle. He was brilliant, eventually becoming a professor at Harvard and Boston College, writing over 80 books, becoming one of the most respected philosophers of our time. But all that intelligence couldn't answer the one question that tormented him. How can a loving God allow such suffering? For years, this question ate at him. He studied every philosophical argument, every theological theory, every attempt to solve what philosophers call the problem of evil. And for the longest time, suffering seemed like the ultimate proof that either God doesn't exist, or if He does exist, He doesn't really love us. But then something happened. Kreeft didn't just find an answer. He discovered that he had been asking the wrong question entirely. You see, Kreeft realized that when we ask, why does God allow suffering? We're making a massive assumption. We're assuming that if God really loved us, our lives would be comfortable, easy, pain-free. We're assuming that love equals the absence of difficulty. But think about this for a moment. Is that actually what love looks like in any other relationship? Does a loving parent never discipline their child? Does a loving coach never push their athlete to the point of exhaustion? Does a loving teacher never challenge their student with difficult problems? Does a loving friend never tell you hard truths that you need to hear? Of course not. In fact, we would say that a parent who never disciplines, a coach who never challenges, a teacher who never pushes, a friend who never confronts, they don't really love at all. They're being selfish, taking the easy path, avoiding the hard work. That real love requires. So why do we expect God's love to be different? This is where Kreeft's revolutionary insight begins. He discovered that we've been looking at suffering completely backwards. We think suffering is evidence that God doesn't love us. But what if, and stay with me here, what if suffering is actually the clearest proof that God does love us? What if your pain isn't God's absence, but God's presence? What if your struggles aren't punishment, but invitation? What if your darkest moments aren't abandonment, but the very times when God is drawing closest to you? I know this sounds impossible right now. I know every fiber of your being might be screaming, that can't be true. But I'm going to show you 3 irrefutable proofs that will change how you see every difficulty you've ever faced. Because Peter Kreeft didn't just theorize about this, he lived it. He experienced suffering that could have destroyed his faith. Instead, it became the very foundation of unshakable belief. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why. Kreeft's argument rests on 3 pillars, 3 undeniable truths about suffering that, when you really understand them, don't just explain why God allows pain, but prove that pain is actually one of His greatest gifts to us. I'm going to walk you through each one. But I need you to put aside everything you think you know about suffering for the next few minutes. Because what you're about to hear might be the most important truth you'll ever encounter. First proof: suffering awakens us to reality, and without awakening, we cannot truly live. Kreeft made a disturbing observation. The most comfortable people in the world are often the most spiritually dead. They're not evil, they're just asleep. They go through life focused on their careers, their entertainment, their next vacation, their social media feed. They never ask the big questions, because they never feel the need to think about the wealthiest, most privileged people you know. How many of them are deeply spiritual? How many spend time contemplating the meaning of existence? How many have a profound sense of purpose beyond their own pleasure? Kreeft realized this isn't a coincidence. When life is easy, we become spiritually lazy. We live on the surface of existence, never diving deep enough to discover what life is really about. We're like people who spend their entire lives in the shallow end of the pool, never learning how to swim in the deep waters where life's real treasures are found. But then suffering comes. Maybe it's a diagnosis. Maybe it's the loss of a job. Maybe it's the end of a relationship. Maybe it's the death of someone you love. And suddenly, all those surface-level concerns that used to dominate your thoughts become irrelevant. You stop caring about what celebrities are doing. You stop worrying about having the latest gadgets. You stop being obsessed with how many likes your photos get. Instead, you start asking the questions that actually matter. What is the purpose of my life? What happens when I die? Is there something greater than myself? How should I really be living? This is what Kreeft calls the Great Awakening. Suffering doesn't just interrupt our comfortable lives. It wakes us up from the coma of superficiality. It forces us to confront the deepest realities of existence that we've been avoiding. And here's the crucial insight. A person who never awakens to these deeper realities never truly lives at all. They exist, but they don't live. They survive, but they don't thrive. They have experiences, but they miss the meaning behind the experiences. Kreeft often points to his intellectual hero, C.S. Lewis, as a perfect example. Lewis was a brilliant Oxford professor, successful author, living a comfortable academic life. He was already a Christian, but in many ways, his faith was comfortable, theoretical, intellectual. Then his wife Joy died of cancer after just a few short years of marriage. Lewis was devastated. He wrote about his anguish in a book called A Grief Observed, where he honestly describes feeling like God had abandoned him, like his faith was falling apart. But something remarkable happened through that suffering. Lewis's faith didn't just survive. It was transformed from a comfortable intellectual belief into a deep, unshakable conviction. His later writings have a depth, a reality, a power that his earlier works, brilliant as they were, simply didn't possess. The suffering didn't destroy Lewis's faith. It awakened him to a dimension of faith he never knew existed. And millions of readers have been blessed by that awakening. Second proof: suffering builds strength that cannot be developed any other way. Every gym in the world operates on a simple principle. Muscles only grow when they're stressed. If you want stronger biceps, you have to subject them to resistance, to weight, to strain. If you want a stronger cardiovascular system, you have to push your heart and lungs beyond their comfort zone. There is no other way. But here's what's fascinating. This principle doesn't just apply to physical strength. It applies to every kind of strength: emotional, mental, spiritual, moral. Kreeft realized that the strongest people he knew, not physically, but in terms of character, wisdom, compassion, resilience, were almost always people who had suffered significantly. And the weakest people, those who crumbled at the slightest difficulty, who couldn't handle any stress, who had no real depth or wisdom, were almost always people who've lived relatively easy lives. Think of suffering as a forge, and your character as raw metal. Raw metal is weak, shapeless, useless. But when you subject it to intense heat and pressure, when you hammer it and shape it through stress, it becomes steel, strong, sharp, valuable. Same process happens with human beings. Easy circumstances create weak character. Difficult circumstances create strong character. This isn't just Kreeft's opinion. It's observable throughout history. Who are the people we most admire? The ones who've overcome great obstacles. Who are the leaders we most trust? Those who've been tested by adversity. Who are the friends we most value? Those who've walked through their own valleys and can genuinely understand ours. Nelson Mandela didn't become a great leader despite his 27 years in prison. He became a great leader because of those 27 years. Mother Teresa didn't develop her compassion despite working with the dying in the slums of Calcutta. She developed it because of that work. Viktor Frankl didn't gain his profound insights about meaning despite surviving the Holocaust. He gained them because of surviving the Holocaust. On the flip side, consider what Kreeft calls the spoiled child syndrome. We all know people who were given everything they wanted, protected from every difficulty, shielded from every hardship. How do they typically turn out? They're often weak, entitled, unable to handle even minor setbacks. They have no real empathy because they've never suffered. They have no genuine wisdom because they've never been tested. They have no deep gratitude because they've never known loss. A parent who protects their child from all difficulty isn't loving them, they're crippling them. They're raising a weak person who will be crushed by the inevitable challenges of adult life. Now, if human parents understand this principle, that love sometimes requires allowing difficulty, why is it so hard to believe that our Heavenly Father might operate the same way? Nativity scenes transitioning to crucifixion imagery. Third and most powerful proof, suffering unites us with Christ in the deepest possible way. Here's where Kreeft's insight becomes truly revolutionary. He realized that Christianity is the only religion in the world where God doesn't just solve the problem of suffering. He enters into it. Buddha taught a way to escape suffering. Hindu gurus teach that suffering is an illusion. Greek philosophers taught that suffering is beneath the dignity of the gods. But Christianity teaches something completely different, that God chose to suffer. Think about the implications of this. If God wanted to solve the problem of human suffering, He had infinite options. He could have prevented it from ever existing. He could have created us as beings incapable of pain. He could have immediately healed every disease, stopped every tragedy, prevented every heartbreak. But He didn't do any of those things. Instead, He did something far more profound. He became one of us and suffered with us. On the cross, Jesus didn't experience just any suffering. He experienced the worst kind of suffering. Physical torture, yes, but also betrayal by His closest friends, abandonment by His followers, mockery from the crowds, and most agonizing of all, separation from His Father as He took on the sins of the world. Why would God choose this? Kreeft discovered the answer, because this is what perfect love looks like. Perfect love doesn't say, "I'll solve your problems." Perfect love says, "I'll go through your problems with you." When you're in pain, Jesus isn't watching from a comfortable distance, giving you advice about how to handle it. He's right there, in the pain with you, because He's experienced everything you're experiencing and more. But here's the most beautiful part. When you suffer, you don't just receive comfort from Christ, you actually participate in His suffering. Paul writes about sharing in the sufferings of Christ and completing what is lacking in Christ's afflictions. This doesn't mean Christ's sacrifice was insufficient. It means that through your suffering, you become intimately united with Him in a way that's impossible through comfort alone. Your pain becomes a form of prayer, a kind of communion, a mystical participation in the very heart of God, This is why the greatest saints and mystics throughout history have often been those who suffered the most. They discovered that suffering, when united with Christ, becomes a doorway into the deepest possible relationship with God. Debate imagery, skeptical faces, challenging questions. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're saying, this sounds like sophisticated rationalization. You're trying to make sense of a senseless world. You're trying to justify an unjust God. Kreeft anticipated this objection, and his response is devastating in its simplicity. He asks, if evil and suffering prove that God doesn't exist, then what do good and beauty prove? Think about this carefully. The atheist argument goes like this. There's suffering in the world, therefore God doesn't exist. But if we're going to use suffering as evidence against God, then logically, we must use joy, beauty, love, and goodness as evidence for God. But atheists never do this. They want to count the bad stuff against God while ignoring all the good stuff. They point to cancer, but ignore the sunset. They mention war, but forget about love. They highlight cruelty, but overlook kindness. This isn't intellectual honesty. This is cherry-picking evidence to support a predetermined conclusion. But let's take their argument to its logical conclusion. If we're really going to weigh the evidence, let's weigh all of it. Yes, there's suffering in the world. But there's also incredible beauty. Yes, there's evil. But there's also overwhelming goodness. Yes, people die. But people also love sacrificially, create beautiful art, show amazing courage, demonstrate breathtaking compassion. When you honestly weigh the good against the bad, what do you find? Most people, if they're honest, have to admit that the good significantly outweighs the bad. Even in the midst of great suffering, most people still find life worth living. Even when facing death, most people are grateful to have lived. Here's Kreeft's ultimate insight. If the existence of evil creates a problem for belief in God, then the existence of good creates an even bigger problem for atheism. Because if we're just random accidents in a meaningless universe, why would we expect anything but suffering? Why would there be any beauty, any love, any justice, any hope at all? This is the great reversal that Kreeft discovered. Suffering isn't the problem that atheism solves and Christianity struggles with. It's exactly the opposite. Christianity provides a coherent explanation for both suffering and joy, both evil and good, both pain and beauty. Atheism can only explain the suffering. It has no real explanation for why there should be any goodness at all. But Christianity explains both. We suffer because we live in a fallen world, but we also experience goodness because we're made in the image of a good God who loves us enough to join us in our suffering and ultimately redeem it. Your pain isn't proof that God has abandoned you. It's proof that He loves you too much to leave you unchanged. Reflection imagery, personal contemplation, hope emerging. So where does this leave you today? Maybe you're watching this in the middle of your own suffering. Maybe you're asking God why He's allowing what you're going through. Maybe you're wondering if He even cares. I want you to remember Peter Kreeft's 3 proofs. Your suffering is awakening you to realities you might never have discovered in comfort. It's building strength in you that can only be forged through difficulty. And it's inviting you into the deepest possible communion with Christ, who chose to suffer for you. Your pain has purpose. Your struggle has meaning. Your tears are not wasted. God hasn't forgotten you. He's transforming you. Here's my challenge to you. The next time you face suffering, and you will, don't just ask, why is this happening to me? Ask, what is this awakening in me? Don't just cry, how long will this last? Ask, how is this making me stronger? Don't just wonder, where is God in this? Recognize God is right here with me in this, because that's the truth Peter Kreeft discovered, and it's the truth that can transform your pain from a curse into a gift, from a burden into a blessing, from an ending into a beginning. If this perspective has shifted something in your heart, let me know in the comments. Share your own story of how suffering became a gift in your life. And if you want to dive deeper into these life-changing truths, make sure you're subscribed, because we're just getting started on this journey of discovery. Your pain has brought you here today. Don't let it be wasted. Let it be the beginning of something beautiful.